Hello and welcome to another episode of Make a Space Sim in Unity. In this tutorial we are going to work on adding a weapon system to our space sim. So right now we have our flight controller that can be switched out between AI and players, and we're going to add a weapon system. So I'm going to walk you through the steps to create kind of a modular weapon system. So we're going to create a weapon prefab that we can stick on our ship, and a weapon class to go along with that. We'll also create an ordnance class that can describe the different types of bullets or missiles or lasers or beams that you could fire out of your weapon. We'll add some explosion particle effects, and then we'll update our input so that we can fire that stuff all off. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to create a quick prefab for our weapon. So just get close to your player ship, and you want to go create empty, and we'll just call this, I'm going to call this MG gun, M gun, just like a machine gun, okay? And then you're going to create a cube, so right near it, and I think we'll just make this the y 0.5 to make it kind of flat, and then I'm going to zoom in on it, and I'm going to make another cube right next to it. I'm going to make that 0.3. The x I'm going to make 0.3, and the z I'm going to make 2. Okay, and then I'm just going to stick it right in the center here, like that. So you can see, look at this. Oh, I'm going to move it up a little bit. Alright, we kind of have the basics for a pretty rudimentary gun. Alright, now, if we're really close here, we have everything kind of set up right next to each other. You could set the transform of the gun empty object to the main cube if you want. So just go to cube, copy component on transform, click on MG gun, and paste component values. It'll give you the same location, and then just highlight the two cubes that you have and put them inside the mgun empty object. Now they're a group. Alright, you need to create one more empty object from this, and call this barrel. Now go to like an overhead perspective, zoom in a little bit, and with barrel selected, you're just going to drag it up and kind of a little bit away. I'm moving mine out a little bit because what I noticed is when we put this on our ship, the way that I did the box collider, it's just a box right now, not a mesh collider, and you could have your gun hit the mesh collider. So just put it away from the gun. It won't matter too much for now. Alright, so once you have this, so that looks like that. Okay, so once you have this, this is basically a prefab. You can drag it into your project if you want. And then once you have the prefab, once you have the prefab, you can delete the one in the scene. Alright, and we're going to add a component. So select your prefab and then click add component, and we're going to add a weapon class to this. Create that. Okay, so now we have a weapon class, and you're going to want to open that up. Alright, so now we have our weapon class, and it's on our new weapon prefab. Okay, so to make the basics of this weapon class, we are going to need our start method, but we're not going to need our update method for this. Okay, so the real main method of this weapon class is actually just public void fire. Okay, and this class is going to take a few things. So the way that a good way to set up weapons in space games is to make sure that you have some sort of projectile to fire, and then a way to kind of set up the velocity for that projectile, and then also have a cooldown timer so that you can't just spam bullets. You can always set your cooldown timer to be very short, so you can have lots and lots of projectiles, depending on the weapon. But you want to make sure that you are not allowing the player to overload the gun. You'll have bullets banging into each other and exploding and things like that. So we're going to need a few variables for this. So the first one I'm going to give you for this is the, let's see, well, we can have a weapon name, so we can just do public string weapon name. I can't call it name because it gets in the way of the game object name, I guess, in the scope. So, and we'll call this our MG gun. Okay, and then you probably want some sort of, you're probably going to want, well, okay, so you're going to want the shots per second. So this will be a float, shots per second. A lot of people just do like a cooldown number, but I like to think of it in terms of shots per second because it gives me kind of an idea of what this gun is able to do. So shots per second, so we're going to do 2 shots per second, okay? And then we can calculate our cooldown timer from that. All right. Other things that we might want to include, so things that we could add in the future are like the types of weapon this could be. So it could be like a kinetic weapon or an energy weapon or a beam weapon or a missile weapon or a radiation weapon, whatever you want. You can have a whole slew of enums basically for that. You could also give it a primary weapon or secondary weapon. So we can do that in the future. But I think for tonight we'll just set this up to do what it needs to do for now. Okay, so shots per second. You may want to add a damage value to this, but we're going to do that with our ordinance. Okay, and then we need our public game object ordinance prefab. Okay, so this is basically be our projectile, and we're also going to need to get our weapon barrel. So actually, the way that I like to do this, and it's kind of a little bit weird, is I'm going to create a class called weapon barrel for this, and that way I can kind of grab it from the gun, and also I can add some scripts to the weapon barrel, and not necessarily have it connected to the gun itself, because weapon barrels might have different types of things like smoke coming out of them, or a muzzle flash or something like that. So we're going to create a class called weapon barrel. Okay, and we'll call it weapon barrel. And giving it a class like this, we'll be able to find it. Okay, so what else do we need? I think those are the main things we need. We also need just a private variable called cooldown timer. And we'll set that to 0. So the cooldown timer, this is going to be like the number that we're going to check our time against to find out if we are ready to shoot again. Okay, so let's start. Okay, so in our start function, we're going to need to be able to find our weapon barrel. So barrel equals, and then we're going to search our transform, get component in children. Now a gun could have 2 barrels, so weapon barrel could in the future be an array of weapon barrels, so you may want that in the future. Right now we're just going to grab one. We're going to keep it kind of simple. This is going to be complex enough tonight, today. So okay, so we're just going to search our transform for children, and if we find one that is of the type weapon barrel, we're going to add it here. Okay, and we're going to keep it in that type weapon barrel. That way we can set off our muzzle function or something like that. So we're going to do that. Okay, and then the other thing we're going to do is, I guess, so we have a couple classes we need to create here beyond this one. So I'm going to skip this for now, and we'll go right into our fire function here. Okay, so in the fire function, we are going to determine what our cooldown is. So our cooldown rate equals 1 divided by shots per second. Okay, so for 1 is the increment of the cooldown rate, so that's 1 second. And so if you do 2 shots per second, it's the cooldown rate is half a second. And if you do 3 shots a second, it's a third of a second. If you do half a shot per second, then the cooldown rate's 2 seconds. You have to wait 2 whole seconds. So something for some big explosive gun. Okay, so once we have that, we're going to use this in a second. So when we want to set our, so we can actually do that. Okay, well, all right, it's fine where it is. Okay, so if the cooldown timer is less than or equal to time.time, okay, so we're just checking to see if our previously set cooldown timer is now less than the time. That means the time is past our cooldown alarm. Then we will actually do the firing. So first thing we'll do is we will set our cooldown timer. And here we're basically just saying, okay, so we've triggered our firing, so now we have to reset our timer. And then we'll just add our cooldown rate to our time. And that will be our new cooldown timer. And the next thing we're going to do is start our firing. Okay, so we're going to create a new projectile, and we will instantiate it. Okay, now a better way to do this is to create a object pool, but that's a pretty complex topic, so it kind of deserves its own video. Okay, so we'll just instantiate for now. Instantiate is just a way to create prefabs into your scene. So you want to do instantiate, you want to put in your ordnance prefab, and then this is where we're going to get our weapon barrel. We're going to use it. We're going to grab the transform of the weapon barrel, so that will actually find the attached transform. And we could cache that earlier in the start if we wanted to as well. And then we are going to weapon barrel transform again. And then we'll just grab the rotation of the barrel as game object. You gotta cast this as a game object because I forget what it normally does. I think it just does objects, so you have to cast it. You can just instantiate without setting it equal to a variable, but if you wanted to do something with it, you need to create the actual variable. So like this would be completely valid without the as in the end, but we're not going to do that. Okay, because we need our new projectile to have a variable so we can reference it. Now we are going to grab the rigid body. We'll make a new variable called rigid body projectile rigid body RB, and then new projectile dot get component and rigid body. Okay. Once we have that, now the reason why we're getting the rigid body is because we are going to add velocity to it. So this is one way you can send your projectiles on their way. It can get a little janky, but oh yeah, I don't have my velocity in here yet. Okay, so the quick way is to just do new projectile transform forward times, and then you're going to do some sort of muzzle velocity. Okay, so you can do something like 300 or something. Okay, but so we would do something like this. Yeah. Okay, so now we're just setting the velocity, and this missile's going to go flying out. Okay, so a couple things we're going to do here. Projectiles, I like to have my muzzle velocity on the projectile so that this number is not hard-coded. So we're going to get it from our ordinance, and then we're also going to get our parent velocity, because when you're flying really fast and you fire a projectile out, if that projectile is a slow-moving projectile and you don't add your ship velocity to it, you'll crash into the projectile. So we will do that in a minute. So this is the start of the weapon script. Okay, so we need a few more classes. We need this weapon barrel class. We need probably an ordnance class here as well. So let's go into, but this script is almost complete. Okay. In fact, just to save us some time, we will just do this right now. We're going to get some errors, but we're going to create another variable here called float muzzle velocity, and we don't have to set it equal to anything yet. Okay, and then in here we will do muzzle velocity equals, and then ordinance prefab dot get component, and we're going to have an ordinance script here, and the ordinance is going to have a muzzle velocity. Okay, and this is so that, like, say you have a cannon and it can shoot different types of projectiles. So you might have like a small caliber round, or you might have a big caliber round, or maybe you can fire missiles out of this thing. It doesn't really matter to this gun whether whatever it fires, right? So you could have a machine gun that fires missiles. They're all going to vary in terms of speeds. So attaching muzzle velocity to the projectile means you could swap these out, and they're not going to be reliant on the gun to figure out how fast they are. And then you can have all sorts of behaviors for the different types of guns. Maybe your players can choose different types of ammunition for their guns and things like that. So a lot of space games I don't think really do that, but you know, you might have like regular rounds and then exploding rounds and fire rounds, you know, like Far Cry or something. Okay. Alright, so we have our ordnance class to make and our weapon barrel class to make, and the last thing I'm going to do is, in my fire method, I'm going to pass it when it is finally passed. I'm going to pass a parent velocity in here. Okay? So, and then, so whatever is calling this method is going to have a velocity, and we are going to put it here and just add it. Okay? Alright, so I think this will work. Okay. It gets a little weird when things are moving sideways and things like that, but okay, so now we're kind of accounting for at least some sort of parent velocity. Maybe not. We probably should do forward velocity for this, but we'll leave it for now. Okay, so we have 2 more classes to make. This script, I think, is done. Okay, so you've got your weapons class, and yeah, so let's go back here. All right, so now we have an error. Oh yeah, the error is just that we don't have a C# clip class called weapon barrel. Okay, so now let's go and find our machine gun, and let's open our prefab, because now we need to access the barrel inside it. Okay, we're going to add a component called weapon barrel. Ooh, make sure you spell it right. We're just going to add this component here. Alright, so yikes. Okay. Alright, and we do have an error in our weapon script. Okay. So weapon barrel transform. We misspelled transform here. Okay, good. Alright, so now we've added a component to the weapon barrel, and we should have, Yes, it's here. I don't know, it's behaving weird. My Unity's been acting up a lot lately. Okay. So as long as you have it there, it should be okay. Save, please. Okay. I guess we need to fix this other error. Okay, so let's create another C# script and call it Ordinance. I just did that in the project menu. I think maybe because we have these compilation errors, we're getting problems. Okay, so I'm gonna clear it. And we need to make sure Ordinance has a muzzle velocity. So we'll make a public variable, float muzzle velocity. We'll make it equal to 300 here. Okay, alright. Alright, now I think, yeah, okay, that was my main problem. I just had, because I did stuff ahead of time. Okay, so you might have the same problem, so just create two classes, Ordinance and Weapon Barrel, and then in Ordinance make sure you have a muzzle velocity. Okay, cool. Save it. Yes, alright, good. Alright, now that we have the weapon done, we're going to leave the weapon barrel empty for now. We could put a muzzle flash on there, but let's do our Ordinance, because that'll be fun. Okay, so I have an Ordinance here. It's just a laser. Okay, so it's basically just a cube that I've stretched out, so I've made it 0.5, 0.5, and 4 for the Z. And then I've added a box collider to it and a rigid body. I didn't really change much of the rigid body. I did put the collision detection to continuous, okay? And I took off gravity so it doesn't fall, okay? Now, in here, we want to add our Ordinance class to it, okay? So if you create that, add an Ordinance class. Now we have the Ordinance class, and we're going to open it up. Okay, so all we have in here is our muzzle velocity. We do not need update or start for this Ordinance. Okay, as your Ordinance gets more complicated, you might, but right now we don't. So let's see, public string. We can give this Ordinance a name. And we'll just call it, I'm going to call it bullet. Okay, or laser. Yeah, laser. Okay. It's a laser machine gun. Alright. We have our muzzle velocity. And then in here, we're not going to really cover this tonight, but you can put your armor damage. Alright, so if this thing hits armor, how much damage do you want to make it do? And then if it hits shields, how much damage does it do? Okay, so maybe this is weak against shields, but strong against armor. Okay, now finally, the most important thing for what we're doing right now is you're going to make a game object variable called explosion. Okay, now once we have that, we are going to, and you can add all sorts of things for your Ordinance here. With missiles, they're going to get even more complicated, and then you might want to break this out into some sort of interface and class that inherits. Okay, so we're going to make a private void on collision enter. Okay, so this is just part of the Unity API, and if this hits anything, we want to explode. Okay, now we need to make an explode method. Okay, so one of the things you can do with Visual Studio is hover over, and I think there's a shortcut key, well, I forget it, but you can go over to these quick actions and it will just make a method for you. Okay, so we have our explode. So this is going to be very simple. Now we're basically just tracking if it hits something, it's going to explode. Okay, so we're going to instantiate. Again, with explosions, the more complex your game gets, you're going to want to do a object pooler. So we'll cover that in the future. Transfer position, and then quaternion identity. Okay, so quaternion identity is basically just like a rotation of 0, essentially. It doesn't really matter with this explosion. And then your transform position is just the position of the where this ordinance kind of is right now. Okay, so this is going to cause the explosion. The last thing you want to do is destroy the game object, and I want to do this as like fast as possible because when these things hit something, you just want to see it explode. Okay, so this is like a very short amount of time. So this basically destroys whatever you want it to. So this is the game object. It's itself, and then it will do it in 0.05 of a second. Okay. All right, so once you have that, you have your ordinance. Very simple ordinance thing. Obviously, there's no damage events or anything like that in here right now. So that'll be a future damage event system that we have to create. Okay, so all right, let's see here. We have that. So now we have our laser, and so my laser now has an ordinance on it. I'm just going to apply this so that my prefab gets it. Okay, and then I'm going to delete my laser from the scene. Okay, so now we have our ordinance, we have our gun, and we have our oh, we don't have an explosion. Okay, so let me show you my explosion. So it's not the best explosion, but there it is. So this, I just want to make this a little bit smaller. So all right, and then okay, so that's okay. All right, so this is your explosion. Okay, so basically how we do this is it's a very simple sphere particle system. We don't really need 1,000 things, but we've limited our max particles to 30, so that should be enough. We don't want it to loop actually, so turn that off, and then I'm going to put the start size to 4, and then so the shape is a sphere. It's a small sphere. You can make it as big as you want, but it will compact and then expand out. And then finally in the render, I'm actually going to make this a quad. So this is under mesh render mode, quad, and default line's fine. I think everything else is fine here. The one final thing that you probably want to do is where it says stop action here, it says none right now. Just destroy it. So when this is done running, you don't want the explosion sitting around and filling up your hierarchy. Okay, so set that to destroy. All right, so it's pretty simple. We might want to make our explosion orange. I'll leave that up for a second. And then that. It's nothing really special. So, okay, once you have your explosion prefab, I'm just going to apply this. Okay. Yeah. All right, now we have our explosion prefab. I'm going to delete this from the scene. Okay, now if we go into our gun, you'll see here we have a ordnance prefab and a weapon barrel. Weapon barrel is going to find itself, but the ordnance prefab we need to put it in there. So we're going to put laser in there. And then inside our laser, we have an ordnance class with an explosion that's missing. So just drag and drop that into there in your prefab. Okay, now this should all be set up. All right, final things to do. Okay, so we have our player input and our ship controller that need to be fixed to make sure they work. Okay, so right now we do not have a way to let the player fire. Okay, we have a fire event, but the fire event doesn't do anything. So in our mouse input, we are going to do a, we'll check if fire event does not equal null. Okay, and that spacing is bad. Okay, so now if fire event does not equal null, and then we're going to say if get input, go to input dot mouse, get mouse button down, just get mouse button, because this is going to be when you hold it down, okay? And we're just going to set this one to 0. Okay, so now if mouse button down, and this returns a bool, okay? So if it's true, we will then fire event, and this fire event it's input get, I just mistyped mouse button down. Okay, so now if you do get mouse button down with a 0, that's the left mouse button, okay? And so if we have fire event, we'll call that, and you can make new other ones for right mouse button, middle mouse button, different fire controls. Okay, that's it for the player input, okay? Now in your ship controller, you're going to have to, you don't have to, oh, you do have to add a fire event. So player input fire event plus equals fire weapon. Okay, we're gonna make a method called fire weapon. Okay, so private void fire weapon. All right, now this is great, but how does your ship controller know that you have a weapon? Okay, so in our start script, we are going to have to find the weapons, okay? For this one, I'm going to actually make an array, just because you know the ship's probably going to have multiple weapons. So right now, we'll just do weapon. Okay, we know that class exists already. We're going to make it an array of weapons, and we can just do my weapons like that. Okay, so now you have an array here, and let's just do it after we do our rigid body in start menu. We'll say my weapons equals transform. And again, so we're going to add our component physically to our ship. So it will be part of the ship's game object. Okay. One of the cool things about this is that we can have a way to call like find weapons or something like that as another method, and then in game you could have it instantiate a weapon right on the ship. And we want to do get components in children, okay, of type weapon. Okay, so if we do this, we're going to basically fill this array with all the weapons that are attached to our ship, okay? So that's pretty powerful. And then we can have all different, you know, we'll have a primary, instead of fire weapon, we'll have like fire primary weapon, fire secondary, fire special, or something like that. You can also have ways to link weapons or equip weapons, things like that, and then that will be your primary weapon. Right now we're just going to play it simple. We're going to have a just the first weapon. So my weapons, and then 0, like that. Okay. Let's see. So, yeah. So the next thing we're going to do real quick is we're just going to check. So if my weapons dot length is greater than 0, then we can fire our weapon. Okay. So we know that we have a public method called fire on our weapons, so we can fire from here, and this takes the parent velocity. So how do we get that? Well, we have from our previous tutorials a rigid body reference here, and your rigid body has a velocity, so you can pass it to your fire method here. All right, so now you have your event. You have your fire weapon that gets called when the player causes the event. And then we've found our weapons that are attached to our game object, and if we found some, we can fire them. So in my case, I need to just check because I have a enemy AI, and so that enemy AI doesn't have any weapons attached to it. So we might do a check for weapons, and then we might have no weapons on the ship, so firing the weapon might not work. So if a player gets in a ship that doesn't have a weapon and they start spamming the mouse button, that event will probably fire because of the input system, and then we need to check to make sure whether we have weapons to fire or not. Okay, this could also be like if you had a equipped weapon, maybe you don't have a secondary weapon, so if you're firing the secondary button, which the input expects to exist, that doesn't necessarily mean that your ship has to have that. Okay, so you need to do a check here. Okay, so we have the fire weapon. We can fire our weapons that we find. I think that is everything there. Okay, there's one last step. You'll see here there's a thing called turn to target in my thing. This is a function that I'm using for the AI, but I'll also be using it when we need to like take control of the ship to turn it to go to a waypoint, or maybe for controlling cap ships. Okay, so AI is really hard to control with torque. So doing a simple turning function is kind of a good way to do it. And it uses the yaw as its like degrees per second, so we can change that in the future too. But that's not part of this tutorial anyway. But if you wanted to see what it does, there it is. Okay, we have that stuff. All right, we still don't have the weapon attached to our ship. So final step: grab your machine gun. Oh, you know, we can even, if I click on it here and I try to fly around, if I press the button, nothing happens. We also don't get any errors. Okay, you can't fire the gun because you don't have it. So we are going to take it and we are going to stick it on our, so grab it from the project, drag it onto your ship game object. Okay, now we've just spawned it way low, and we're gonna put it here and then just position it somewhere that you like. I like these types of guns to be on the wings. And remember that our barrel is out in the front here. Okay, so I've just attached this to the wing. Okay, and I'm just going to double check my my box collider. So I think my barrel's okay. I'm going to move it up a little bit more. Okay, we can fix that in the future too. So okay, so now we've added our gun. The ship doesn't really know anything about it yet. It might be looking for it. You can see it's going to look for it at runtime. Okay, so now we have our gun. It's part of our, it's just right in the main part of our ship controller here. All right, now if we press play, now we have our gun attached. Ooh, so looks like maybe my barrel's a little bit too close, or my velocity's not working. Well, I guess it worked here. Yeah, it didn't work there. So now we're firing stuff out of our gun. And so if you get some random explosions because your laser's hitting your ship, you can fix that by moving the barrel. All right, check that out. There we go. Got him. And there's other ways to deal with the with your projectiles hitting your own ship. You can set different layer masks. You can also turn off collisions for like a 1/10 of a second before after you fire it. Although these are moving pretty fast, so you might not want to do that. All right, there he goes. He's escaping. I may have broken my AI. Maybe not though. Let's see. Nope, he's still doing it. That's awesome. Okay, well, that is everything for this tutorial. I hope this was helpful and useful, and I hope what we set up today is something that you can expand on, add more weapon styles, add more weapon models. You can put a model in here instead of having a cube gun. You can add more stats to the guns, add more stats to your ordnance, swap out the ordnances, just experiment with it. So I hope that was helpful, and please like the video and subscribe, and leave a comment if you have any questions, or if you're just liking the series, and if you have any ideas for other things you want me to cover, please let me know, and I will definitely put it on the list. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed it. All right.